We'd like to welcome you all to our F.A.M.E program today. Before we introduce our speaker, just a quick word about the program that you're involved with. F.A.M.E stands for Free Amendments, Maintenance, and Education. So if you haven't taken advantage of your free annual consultation, be sure and give us a call. Don't call today. Well, you can call today. Nobody will be there. You can leave a message. We take messages. Also, if it's time to review your trust and you might want to pull it off the shelf, go through it, make sure that those beneficiaries are still the people you want to leave stuff to. Take a quick review, and if we need to update, give us a call. Want to just give a word of gratitude to Jacqueline, who has put all of this together. She's done a magnificent job, and in fact, I think she deserves a round of applause. Thank you, Jacqueline. She's the shy one in the back. Wave your hand, Jacqueline. There we go. Okay. Also, Laura McHugh is in the back. She's our caterer. Her catering company is As You Wish, and so I'm sure she would appreciate giving her a call and for your catering needs. But you will recognize her. She also works for us at Wealth Architects, our sister financial planning firm. When I told some of our clients that we were having this program today and that it was going to be an impressionist of Mark Twain, they said, "Oh, don't tell me Hal Holbrook is coming again." I said, "No, it's McAvoy Lane," and they got all excited. So we're very, very excited to have Mac with us today. He's an impressionist extraordinaire, and I'll let him do his own introduction, and we'll bring on McAvoy Lane.
Thank you for that gracious introduction. Mr. Anderson is a true gentleman. He has but one crying flaw to his otherwise sterling character that I know of. He's on the committee for the endowment of Theodore Roosevelt. You know that grizzly bear that Roosevelt said he shot up in Montana was a cow. Last time I saw Teddy, I said, "Teddy, I could have been a Rough Rider if we'd gone to war in automobiles." Don't you love this town? I love Genoa. Oh, I've only heard one disparaging word in all my years about Genoa. It has no twilight. No, when the sun sets here, it's like the lid of a coffin slamming shut. The Reeses built a little way station here along the Mormon Trail. Some people liked it enough to stay, mostly Italians. So they named the little settlement after the birthplace of Christopher Columbus. And so proud were they of Columbus that in the little hotel they built here, they put on display a skull of Columbus when he was a boy. And they found it to be such an attraction that sometime later, in another room of the hotel, they put on display a skull of Columbus when he was a man. So we became the state of attractions right here in Genoa. The Territorial Enterprise, the paper that launched my career, started right here in Genoa. Yes, and the printing press doubled as the jail. Well, it was the only thing in the town the prisoner could not drag off so they handcuffed him to the printing press. Well, this served the prisoner well. When they let him go, he was current. Knew where all the good jobs were. Snowshoe Thompson carried the mail from Hangtown to here, 90 miles, over 20 years, 1856 to 1876. There was a man. He was the only connection between California and Nevada in the wintertime. 3 days it would take him. On skis, you might have seen them in the museum over at Donner. 25 pounds, 10 feet. And if he came across a pack of wolves feeding on a carcass, he'd stare them down. And if a storm came through, he'd just clear the snow off a flat rock and do Norwegian folk dances on that rock till the storm passed through. Nobody was like Snowshoe. One of his jumps was measured at 185 feet, just for fun, 55 miles an hour. I asked Snowshoe once if he ever got lost. He said, no, Sam, I never got lost. I was seriously disoriented for 2 or 3 days once. The most memorable moment I had in this wonderful town was riding behind 2 beautiful Belgian horses with a beautiful lady sitting next to me. This was last May. Jacqueline, your Jacqueline. She has another life, you know. I know she doesn't look to be 150 years old. Just on the way over here this morning, I stopped at the oldest tavern in Nevada to pay my respects. And as I walked in, this fellow was sitting there, looked like he had been sitting there since the war ended, Civil War. And he shouted out, "I read every book you ever wrote." I said, "Well, that makes my day. Which one was your favorite?" He got real quiet. There was this pregnant pause, and everybody in the bar quieted down. Then he said, "Tequila Mockingbird." I said, no, that was Jose Cuervo. Well, you might be wondering how Mark Twain got all the way from the Mississippi River to Genoa. I'm going to tell you, if I can remember. You see, I was piloting on the river when we first learned that South Carolina had gone out of the Union. This was in December of 1860. And by the summer of '61, the first wash of the wave of war broke upon the shores of Missouri. I took the last boat up out of New Orleans after the fall of Fort Sumter. Well, 15 of us gathered together in a secret place by night and formed ourselves into a military company, the Marion Rangers. I was made a second lieutenant. We had no first lieutenant, I don't know why. Our objective was to join up with the Confederacy. And for a while, life was idly delicious. There was nothing to mar it. Until some farmers brought the alarm one day. They said it was rumored that the enemy was approaching over Hyde's Prairie. Well, this brought sharp and general consternation. So in the confusion, we did not know which way to retreat. Captain Lyman had some calming words, however. He said, "Inasmuch as the enemy is approaching over Hyde's Prairie, Our course is simple. All we need to do is not to retreat towards him. Any other direction will answer our needs perfectly. Well, Captain Lyman received a great many compliments. He said to protect the camp from surprise, we should post a picket. So I ordered Sergeant Bowers to go out to Hyde's Prairie and post a picket until midnight. He said he wouldn't go on account of the weather. So I ordered the others to go. They said they wouldn't go in any kind of weather. So for the next 2 weeks, we learned more about retreating than the man who invented retreating. I was incapacitated from retreating. And in that little time, that 2 weeks, the desire to kill people to whom I had not been introduced had passed away. So I seceded from the secession. Well, the unget-aroundable fact is I was missing in action before a shot was fired. Some said I was too irregular, even for the irregulars. But as luck would have it, my brother had been appointed secretary to Territorial Governor Nye out in the Silver Land, Nevada. So I fancied myself to be secretary to the secretary, and I purchased the $150 fare each on the Overland stagecoach out of St. Joe, and off we went at a spanking gait with our 6-shooters, a deck of cards, and a 6-pound unabridged Webster's dictionary. We should have left it behind. Every time we avalanched from one side of that stagecoach to the other, the dictionary came behind, and every time it came, it damaged somebody. Oh, the first trip across, it barked Orion's elbow. Next time it came, it hurt me in the stomach area. And the third trip, it bent old Mr. Bemis's nose up to where he could look down his nostrils. No, I don't believe the dictionary has been any benevolence to society. It's a pretty uncreative mind that cannot find more than one way to spell a word, don't you think? Upon arriving at our first way station, I noticed the tablecloths and napkins had not arrived, and they were not looking for them either. Our breakfast sat before us, slumgullion, but our teeth were idle. Long about an hour after breakfast, we saw our first coyote. The coyote is a living, breathing allegory of want. He is always hungry, always poor, out of luck, and friendless. A flea would desert him for a bicycle. But if you set a swift-footed dog after him, you'll enjoy it ever so much, especially if it is a dog that has a good opinion of himself and has been brought up to think he knows something about speed. You see, the coyote will go swinging gently off on that deceitful trot of his, and every little while will smile a fraudful smile over his shoulder that will fill that dog entirely full of encouragement and worldly ambition. Yes, and cause him to throw his heart into his heels. And yet for the soul of him, he cannot figure out why it is he cannot get perceptibly closer. And it makes him madder and madder to see how gently the coyote glides along and never pants or sweats or ceases to smile. And he grows more and more incensed to see how shamefully he's been taken in by an entire stranger, and what an ignoble swindle that long, calm, soft-footed trot is. And next he notices he's beginning to get fagged, and that the coyote has to slacken speed a little to keep from running away from him. And then that little town dog is mad in earnest. He begins to strain and weep and swear and paw the sand even higher. And then in the instant that a wild new hope is lighting up his face, the coyote turns and smiles blandly upon him as if to say, "Well, I must tear myself away from you, bub. Business is business." Forthwith there's a rushing sound and the sudden splitting of a long crack through the atmosphere. And behold, That dog is alone in the midst of a vast solitude. And for as long as a year after that, whenever there's a great cry of coyote, that dog will merely glance in that direction without emotion and apparently observe to himself, I don't believe I want any of that pie. 20 days on the overland. Once we heard the thunder of hooves push back the flap, and there was the Pony Express galloping past like the belated fragment of a storm. And so sudden was it all, and so like a flash of unreal fancy, that were it not for the fleck of white foam left quivering and perishing on the mail sack, we might have been left in doubt as to whether we saw a pony and a rider at all. They were so fast. Oh, we'd climb up on top of the box at dawn in our long johns, smoke our pipes and cigars, and watch the sunrise on the prairie. Even to this day, it thrills me to think of the wild sense of freedom that used to make the blood dance in our veins on those fine overland mornings. And at last we disembarked in the Silver Land. This was in August of 1861, and back then, I have to tell you, Carson City was the most uninhabitable place on earth. Nothing grew there. Oh, even the birds, when they flew over, carried their own provisions. But we hiked into the foothills and looked back on Carson, nestled in that flat sandy desert, surrounded by such prodigious mountains that they seemed to expand your soul, until you felt yourself swelling into a colossus. And in that instant you were seized with a burning desire to stretch forth your hand, put Carson in your pocket, and walk off with it. It was beautiful, really. In exploring the sink, we traveled down the Carson River ways. When one is accustomed to the monstrous, mile-wide Mississippi, he grows accustomed to associating the word river with a certain degree of watery grandeur. So when one stands on the shores of the Carson, he's disappointed. Oh, one of the most vigorous forms of exercise one can contrive is to run and jump across the Carson until he's overheated, and then get down and drink it dry. No, it's a moist ditch. That's what it is. If it were my river, I wouldn't leave it out of doors at night. I could see I was going to need some transportation while in Carson City, so I attended an auction and bought a genuine Mexican plug. Well, I didn't know what a genuine Mexican plug was, really, but I bought it on the advice of a man I later found out was the auctioneer's brother. Well, his tail had been chopped off, or he sat down on it wrong at one time or t'other, but anyways, he was proud of it. But this left him only his heels with which to fight off the flies. Well, with some help of some others, some holding his head and some his tail, I was able to climb onto that steed. But my feet slipped through the stirrups on the inside. So I was handcuffed at the ankles, and he knew it. So he put his feet together, all of them, in a bunch, lowered his back, and fired me 5 feet into the air. And somebody shouted out, "Whoa, don't he buck!" Well, I came back down on the saddle, but the laughter this provoked, he took for applause, fired me up again. This time I came down on the high pommel, which was too much variety for me. So I decided to get off. But now he was standing straight up on his hind legs, walking around like a member of Congress. You might think I was afraid, but I wasn't. I knew I could stay on him so long as his ears did not pull out. Suddenly, I was in the air again, and when I came down, that genuine Mexican plug was gone. So I dug myself out of the ground and made up my mind that if that auctioneer's brother's funeral was held while I was in Carson City, I would cancel all other recreations and attend it. Well, I tried my hand at prospecting, yes, but I didn't have any luck. I soon enough discovered a silver mine weren't nothing but a hole in the ground with a fool at the bottom and a liar at the top. But I did one thing right. I wrote a letter to the Territorial Enterprise in Virginia City about my adventures in the mining fields. And I signed that letter, Josh. Yes, Josh. I was looking for a nom de guerre, a cognomen. Once before, I had used E. Pandemondus Adrastus Blab, but that didn't sound good. So sometime later, I took Thomas Jefferson Snodgrass. That didn't sound good either. But on the strength of that letter, signed Josh, I was offered a job as a reporter. And Joe Goodman, the publisher, told me when I signed on at the Territorial Enterprise in Virginia City, Sam, you have but one responsibility here. Get your facts straight. Then you can distort them as much as you like. So we never let the truth stand in the way of a good story back then. No, I learned in Virginia City, a good lie can travel twice around the globe before the truth gets its boots on. We had fun. I remember attending a ball one night over in Gold Hill in a ramshackle, dismal old barn of a place. It was lighted from end to end with tallow candle chandeliers made out of barrel hoops suspended from the ceiling. The grease dripped all over us. There were 200 or 300 stalwart men present, dancing with cordial energy, half of them representing women. Yes, each with a handkerchief tied around his left arm to distinguish him from the men. I was a lady myself. I wore a revolver in my belt. So did all of the other ladies. Nevada truly was battle-born. I covered the legislature for the Enterprise, and in all these years, nothing has changed. Never have I seen a body of men with tongues so handy and information so uncertain. Oh, they could talk for a week without ever getting rid of an idea. If any one of them had been on hand when the Creator was at the point of saying, "Let there be light," we never would have got it. No, the Nevada legislature meets every 2 years for 60 days, when they ought rightly meet every 60 years for 2 days. When the Nevada legislature is in session, nobody is safe. Well, I might have stayed longer than my 21 months at the Enterprise, yes. But for a fella by the name of Laird, James Laird, he was editor for the competition, the Daily Union. Imagine, we had 4 daily newspapers up there back then. We were larger than Los Angeles at the time. And this fellow Laird, perhaps you've known someone like him in your lifetime, but he was endowed with a stupidity that with the slightest stretch would wrap 4 times around the globe and tie. And he slandered my good name in his newspaper. Well, if you must know, he called me a liar, a poltroon, and a puppy. Well, I slandered him back in the Enterprise. This went back and forth 2 or 3 days until I had to call him a coward and challenge him to a duel, which was imprudent. Oh, I wore a sidearm, yes, but that was only so as not to be conspicuous. I didn't know how to shoot one. But my friend Gillis knew how to fire. So Gillis and I went out to the appointed spot for the duel, out at 6 Mile Canyon, a half hour early to practice. And Gillis was such a good shot that he took the head off a mud hen just as Laird came riding up on his pony. And Gillis was quick enough to hand me that smoking sidearm and say, "Nice shot, Sam. Don't kill him. Just showed his nasty face off." Well, Laird heard that. He did twice around on his pony, and off he went. But I was not far behind, for Governor Nye issued a warrant for my arrest for dueling, which had just been made illegal in Nevada. So I went off to San Francisco to be unemployed. Coldest winter I ever spent in my life was a summer in San Francisco. I got on at the Call. I covered the opera for the Call. You might think I don't know anything about opera, but I do. I am proud to say I have seen the first act of everything Wagner ever wrote. But I found the effect of bees so powerful upon me, one act was quite sufficient. No, Wagner's music is better than it sounds. On one occasion, they sent me on a pool assignment with some other reporters and journalists, Bret Hart, Ambrose Bierce, and some of those. It was curious to note the next morning, Ambrose reported we had been to Benicia. Bret Hart wrote we had been to the Cliff House. Well, the poor devils had been drinking and did not really know where we had been. I knew, but chose not to tell. So I timed my retirement at the Call to coincide with my dismissal. Then I was fairly hard aground financially. I did have just enough money to hire a hall and give a lecture, and I became intimately familiar with that great menace to the itinerant lecturer, known as the local interviewer. Oh, these people have a time-worn custom of probing you with a long string of personal questions, which you try to answer as conscientiously as you can. Then they go home and improve upon you. Or you can run over the printed result with a divining rod and not find yourself. One of those villains came pounding at my door well before noon, announcing he was with the Call. Well, my first impulse was to pulverize him with the chair, but he sat down in it and began, "Mr. Twain, may I ask you some questions calculated to bring up interesting points in your public and private life?" "Well, yes, but I have a very poor memory." "Well, that's all right, just so long as you do the best you can. Let me begin with this. Who's the most interesting American you ever met?" "Aaron Burr." "Aaron Burr? Aaron Burr died in 1836. You were born in 1835. How is that possible?" "It's not. But son, you have gained distinction. For this is the first time to my knowledge that fool paper of yours has corrected an error before it went to press." "Well, all right, let me continue with this. Is your real name Mark Twain?" "I don't rightly remember at the moment." "Well, that's a strange answer. You see, I happen to know for a fact your real name is Samuel Langhorne Clemens." "That might be. But you see, I had a brother, William, Bill, we used to call him. And we were twins. And we got mixed up in the bathtub. One of us drowned. Nobody knew which. Some thought it was Bill. Some thought it was me. Well, what did you think?" "Oh, I'd give worlds to know. There was one curious thing about it. You see, one of the children had a peculiar mark. It was a mole behind the shoulder. And that child was me. And that was the child that was drowned." That was the end of the interview. Well, it's a terrible death to be talked to death. I think if God had meant for us to talk more than listen, he'd have given us 2 mouths and 1 ear, don't you? So I like to pause and give you a chance to ask me a question about the olden days. Or perhaps about your modern times. I've been around so long now, I know a little bit about everything. And if I don't have an answer, at least I'll have an opinion. So now's your opportunity if you have a question. I travel across this great land of ours in our schools. And I had a 7th grade boy get me up a stump. He was 13 years old. He asked me, "Mr. Twain, who was president when you were my age?" I said, "Well, I knew when I was your age." Look it up in the library, why don't you? There are only hormones with feet at that age. But you gotta love them. I try to remind our young people, the man who does not read good books has no advantage over the man who cannot read them. Isn't that so? So whenever you have a choice of 2 things to read, let's say between a tabloid and a good book, try to remember that quote from your old friend Mark Twain. Just this morning on the way down here from North Shore, I stopped for coffee. And I looked up and read the headline on a tabloid. And it read, "Woman pigs out on 5 gallons of Haagen-Dazs and freezes to death." Really, you read a tabloid, it's like eating cotton candy for dinner. You have nothing to build on. But you read a good book, you have ideals and ideas. And that good book can bring out your best instincts, and good things can happen for you when you read good books. Yeah. Well, how about a question now? I know with this group here, I'll be up a stump in no time. This made me smile. You must know this fella, Buffett, Warren Buffett. He quoted me just a while back, made me laugh. He said, "Mark Twain told us a man who picks a cat up by the tail is getting 60 to 70 times more information than a man who does not pick a cat up by the tail." And if Mark Twain were alive today, he would be dealing in derivatives for about 2 weeks, and then he'd go back to cats. You gotta love that Buffett. Yeah. Well, how about a question now? I have to tell you, I never saw an opportunity until it had ceased to be one. And whenever I got in on the ground floor of a commercial venture, there was an SOB in the basement.